The sirens screamed through the stone walls of San Quentin State Prison, cutting the air like a knife. Guards ran down the long tier, boots pounding metal floors. Doors slammed. Men shouted. Somewhere behind thick steel, a man on death row was gasping for breath, his chest rising and falling too fast, his skin burning with fever. Outside his cell, officers stopped, frozen for a second, because they all knew what this meant. The virus was already inside. This was San Quentin, the most infamous prison in America. A place where the state of California kept men it planned to kill. A place where silence could last for hours, then suddenly explode into chaos. That night, fear moved faster than any prisoner ever could. It moved through the tiers, through the vents, through the minds of everyone locked inside. This outbreak would become one of the deadliest prison disasters in U.S. history. But in that moment, no one yet knew how bad it would get, or how many lives it would change forever. And the question hung in the air like smoke. How did it come to this? Years earlier, long before the sirens and sickness, San Quentin already carried a heavy shadow. The prison sits on the edge of San Francisco Bay, its old concrete walls facing the water. From far away, it almost looks calm. But inside, it is a world built on control, time, and waiting. San Quentin has been open since the 1800s. Over the years, it became famous not for fixing people, but for holding the worst of the worst. This is where California's death row lives. For decades, men sentenced to die were locked in tiny cells the size of a bathroom. Many spent 22 to 23 hours a day alone. They ate alone, slept alone, thought alone. Some waited years. Some waited decades. Every sound mattered. Every footstep in the hall could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. San Quentin once held Charles Manson, one of America's most notorious criminals. His name alone brought reporters, protesters, and fear. Even after he died, the prison kept its dark fame. People called it the end of the line. Once you arrived here, there was usually no going back. But death did not always come quickly. California struggled for years over how to carry out executions. Lawsuits filled the courts. Judges argued about lethal injections, gas chambers, and inmate health. Executions stopped, then started, then stopped again. Men on death row lived in a strange limbo. They were sentenced to die, but not told when. This waiting broke some of them. One former guard said the silence was the worst part. You could walk past hundreds of cells and hear nothing. Just breathing. Just the buzz of lights. Sometimes a man would talk to himself for hours. Sometimes he would scream. Sometimes he would not speak at all. Life inside San Quentin was not always loud. Often it was painfully slow. Days followed the same pattern. Lights on. Count time. Food trays slid through slots. Count again. Exercise alone in small cages. Back to the cell. Count again. Men marked time by meals, not calendars. Birthdays passed unnoticed. News from the outside world came late, if it came at all. Then came the year that changed everything. In early 2020, news of a deadly virus spread across the United States. People watched it on TV. They heard words like lockdown and quarantine. Outside, cities closed. Schools shut down. Hospitals filled up. Inside San Quentin, many thought the thick walls would protect them. They were wrong. At first, prison officials tried to act calm. They limited visits. They talked about safety. But San Quentin was old and overcrowded. Cells were close together. Air did not move well. Social distancing was almost impossible. Still, death row stayed locked down, as it always had been. Men were already used to isolation. Some even thought they were safer than people on the outside. Then buses arrived. In a decision that would later be heavily criticized, inmates were transferred from another prison to San Quentin. Some of them were already sick. The virus rode in quietly, hidden behind prison doors and paperwork. Within days, men started coughing. At first, it was just whispers down the tier. That guy's sick. Someone collapsed. Guards noticed it too. Calls for medical help increased. Stretchers rolled past cells. Fear returned to a place that already lived on fear. Men on death row banged on doors, begging for tests, begging for help. Some shouted through the night, asking guards to check on their neighbors. Others lay on their bunks, too weak to stand. The prison medical system struggled. There were not enough staff, not enough space, not enough answers. Outside the walls, families and lawyers demanded action. Lawsuits were filed. Judges asked questions. How could this happen in a prison full of men already under the state's control? Inside, the virus did not care about laws. As cases exploded, San Quentin became a national headline. Reporters called it a disaster. Advocates called it cruel. Officials called it a challenge. But for the men locked inside, it was simple. They were dying. Some men survived. Some did not. Cells that once held quiet men became empty. Officers fell sick too. Fear spread on both sides of the bars. Every cough felt like a warning. Every delay in medical care felt like a death sentence. And death row, a place designed for slow, controlled death by the state, had turned into something else entirely. It had become a place where death came fast and without warning. Yet even as the virus spread, life inside San Quentin did not stop completely. Counts still happened. Doors still opened and closed. Orders were still shouted down the tiers. The system tried to keep moving, even as it cracked. Men who had survived years of isolation now faced something worse, not knowing if they would wake up the next day. One inmate later said the fear was different this time. On death row, you know why you might die. With COVID, you didn't. As the weeks passed, pressure grew. The public demanded answers. Families demanded names. Lawyers demanded releases for sick and elderly inmates. The governor faced hard choices. And inside San Quentin, another sound began to rise. Not sirens this time. Coughing. It echoed through the tiers, bouncing off concrete walls, growing louder each night. Men pressed their faces to cold bars, trying to see if guards were coming. Some prayed. Some cursed. Some simply waited. Then one night, the alarms went off again. A man on death row had collapsed in his cell. Officers rushed in. Medical staff followed. The tier fell silent as everyone listened. Was he breathing? No one answered. And as guards fought to save him, another call came over the radio. Then another. Then another. The outbreak was no longer contained. It was exploding. And San Quentin, America's most infamous death row, was about to face its darkest hour yet. The night the alarms kept ringing, no one slept. Inside San Quentin, radios crackled nonstop. Medical emergency. Another cell. Tier B. Tier C. Guards moved fast, but not fast enough. Stretchers rolled down narrow walkways, their wheels shaking on old metal floors. Men watched from behind bars, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Some inmates banged on their doors, shouting names. Others stayed silent, afraid that making noise would make things worse. The virus had turned the prison upside down. Death row, once known for stillness and waiting, was now full of panic. By morning, word had spread. More inmates were sick than anyone had admitted. Fever, trouble breathing, bodies shaking. Some men could not stand. Others fainted while waiting for help. The prison hospital filled quickly. Hallways became makeshift care areas. Guards stood outside cells, unsure what to do next. San Quentin was losing control. Outside the prison walls, news cameras gathered. Headlines flashed across TV screens. San Quentin COVID crisis. Deadliest prison outbreak. Families of inmates called nonstop begging for updates. Many were told nothing. Inside, men waited. One death row inmate, James Walker, had been inside San Quentin for over 20 years. He knew the prison's sounds by heart. The clank of doors, the echo of boots. But now there was a new sound. Heavy breathing, wheezing, coughing that would not stop. James felt sick too. At first, he told himself it was nothing. He had survived worse. Years alone in a cell had hardened him. But then the fever came. His head burned. His chest felt tight. When he tried to stand, the room spun. He pressed the call button. No one came. Hours passed. Food trays slid through slots, untouched. Count time came and went. James lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it would end. Not by execution, not by court order, but alone, sick and forgotten. Across the tier, another man began screaming for help. Guards finally arrived, wearing masks that looked thin and worn. They checked James through the bars. One shook his head. "Too many," he said quietly to another officer. "Too many sick inmates. Too few beds." As the days dragged on, the prison became a maze of confusion. Orders changed daily, sometimes hourly. Some inmates were moved. Others were locked down completely. Death row men were told to stay inside their cells, even when they were sick. Isolation, once a punishment, became a weak form of protection. Legal battles exploded outside. Lawyers argued that the state had failed its duty. Judges demanded reports. The governor faced public anger. How could a place meant to control every movement lose control so badly? San Quentin's age worked against it. Old vents carried air from cell to cell. Narrow walkways forced guards and inmates close together. Cleaning supplies ran low. Fear ran high. Some guards refused to come to work. They were afraid of bringing the virus home. Others showed up anyway, exhausted and scared. They too got sick. Inside the prison, rumors spread faster than the virus. "They're letting people die," one inmate whispered through the vent. "They don't care about death row," another replied. Hope became rare. Then came a small change. After weeks of pressure, officials began talking about moving inmates out of San Quentin. Older prisoners, medically fragile prisoners, men who were not a danger anymore. It was not freedom, but it was a chance to survive. For death row inmates, the news felt distant. Most knew they were not going anywhere. James listened to guards talk as they walked past a cell. One mentioned deaths. Another mentioned numbers, so high they did not sound real. James closed his eyes. He had faced death before, many times in his mind. But this felt different. This felt out of control. One afternoon, the prison fell unusually quiet. No shouting, no alarms, just silence. Then a single announcement came over the loudspeaker. A calm voice, trying not to sound afraid. "All units, prepare for emergency response." Men looked at each other through bars. What now? Moments later, the sounds returned. Fast footsteps. Radios yelling. Doors opening and closing. On another tier, a man had stopped breathing. CPR failed. He was pronounced dead inside his cell. News of the death hit death row like a wave. Some men cried. Some prayed. Some stared at the floor. The reality was clear now. This virus could kill them, and no one could stop it. James felt his chest tighten again. He struggled to breathe. This time, when he pressed the call button, a guard came quickly. They opened his cell. Light flooded in. 2 officers lifted him onto a stretcher. As they rolled him down the tier, James saw faces pressed against bars. Men watching him like he was already gone. He wanted to tell them something, anything, but he could not speak. The prison hospital was chaos. Beds lined up close together. Machines beeped. Staff moved fast, sweating under protective gear. James was given oxygen. His vision blurred. He drifted in and out of sleep. When he woke, he heard voices. Doctors talking about space, about supplies, about death rates. One word stuck in his mind: failure. Outside San Quentin, the story had grown bigger. Lawmakers demanded answers. Civil rights groups demanded change. The prison became a symbol of everything wrong with the system. Inside, time lost meaning. James survived the night. Others did not. Days later, death row was quieter than ever. Empty cells stood open, their doors unmoving. Men whispered names of those who were gone. The waiting returned, but now it was heavier. Then another shock came. A judge ordered a major reduction of inmates at San Quentin. Transfers would begin immediately. Buses would arrive. Men would be moved out to stop the spread. The same solution that brought the virus in was now being used to push it out. Fear returned. Would the transfers help? Or would they spread the virus even further? As guards prepared lists and packed inmates, one more alarm rang out. Louder than before. Urgent. Different. James, back in his cell, but still weak, heard it and froze. A guard ran past, shouting into his radio. There had been a death on death row. Not from COVID. A man had taken his own life. And the prison, already breaking under pressure, began to crack even more. The news spread quietly at first. A man on death row was dead. Not from the virus. Not from illness. He had been found alone in his cell, his body still, his life gone by his own hand. Guards did not say his name over the radio, but everyone inside knew what it meant. The pressure had finally crushed someone. That morning, death row felt heavier than ever. The air was thick, like it was hard to breathe even for the men who were not sick. Cells stayed locked longer than usual. Guards moved slowly, their faces tight and tired. No one shouted. No one joked. Even the loud inmates stayed silent. This was the other kind of death San Quentin was known for. James Walker sat on his bunk, wrapped in a thin blanket. His body was weaker now. COVID had passed through him, but it had left scars behind. His lungs burned when he breathed too deep. His hands shook when he stood. He stared at the empty cell across from him. Someone had lived there yesterday. Now it was just concrete and silence. For years, death row inmates had fought their battles alone. But now the prison itself seemed to be fighting them too. The virus had exposed every crack in the system. Overcrowding, poor healthcare, old buildings, slow responses. San Quentin was not just holding death anymore. It was creating it. Transfers began the next day. Buses pulled up outside the prison gates under heavy security. Names were called. Some inmates packed quickly. Others sat frozen, unsure if moving was safer than staying. James was not on the list. Most death row inmates were not. They watched as men were taken away, wondering if those buses carried hope or another disaster. Guards wore masks and gloves now, but fear still showed in their eyes. Every movement felt risky. Outside, the public demanded accountability. Investigations were launched. Reports showed shocking numbers. Hundreds infected. Dozens dead. San Quentin became a warning sign for the entire country. Inside, the days dragged on. The prison tried to return to routine, but nothing felt normal. Meals came late. Medical checks were rushed. Some inmates never fully recovered. Others were still sick, still coughing, still scared. James began writing letters again. He wrote about the sounds of the prison, about the sirens, about the men who died without families near them, about the man who took his own life. He did not know if anyone would ever read his words. Weeks passed. The outbreak slowed, but the damage was done. San Quentin would never be the same. Death row, once a place of quiet waiting, had become a place of trauma. Legal battles continued. Judges ruled that conditions had been unsafe. Officials admitted mistakes. Promises were made. Change was discussed. But inside the walls, change came slowly. One evening, as the sun set over the bay, casting orange light through the small windows, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. Calm. Controlled. All inmates, prepare for count. James stood. He felt tired, but alive. As guards walked the tier, one stopped near James's cell. The officer looked older now, more tired than before. You made it, the guard said softly. James nodded, but making it did not feel like winning. Later that night, another sound filled the prison. Not sirens, not shouting, silence. The kind that comes after disaster. San Quentin had survived the outbreak, but at a terrible cost. The virus had done what years of lawsuits and protests could not. It had forced the world to look inside, to see death row not as monsters or headlines, but as human beings locked inside a system that failed them. Yet the story did not end there. Months later, officials announced major changes. Death row would be restructured. Some inmates would be moved. Conditions would be reviewed. California even spoke openly about ending executions altogether. For some, it was too late. For others, it was a fragile hope. James listened to the news from his cell. He had lived through the worst moment in San Quentin's history. He had watched men die from sickness, from despair, from neglect. He wondered what history would say about this place. Would San Quentin be remembered as a prison that learned from its failures? Or as a warning that came too late? That night, as James lay on his bunk, a distant alarm rang again. Short, sharp, then silence. Guards rushed down the tier. Another emergency, another unknown. And inside America's most infamous death row, everyone held their breath, knowing that in San Quentin, even survival was never guaranteed.